of NAMI, Tennessee, live at home. Happy President's Day! We are super excited to be here. I have a super awesome guest, but before we get to any of that, I'm going to tell you about the email list. NAMI Tennessee's email list is one, super free, super cool, and super awesome. But more importantly, the number 4, it tells you everything that you need to know about things that are going on across your state and at NAMI Tennessee. Things like, of course, this live, walks, galas, and of course, legislative advocacy that you can get involved in. We send about one a week. We highly recommend it. Like I said, it's absolutely free. Just head over to namitn.org. All right, that is out of the way, and that was super boring. We have an awesome guest. Will you please introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are?
Thank you so much, Gabe. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining and tuning into the talk today. So I am Morenike Murphy. I am the CEO here at the Center of Hope for Behavioral Health. We are an outpatient behavioral health center here in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. We do serve Davidson County, and we also have an office in Springfield, so we serve Robertson County as well. We also provide outpatient behavioral health telehealth services across the entire state of Tennessee. So I am very excited to be here today and thankful for the opportunity to chat with Gabe today. This is probably, I've actually lost count, so I'm just going to say 20 plus years working within Tennessee's mental health system. The majority of my 20 plus years have actually been working within Tennessee's mental health crisis system. Started out working at Centerstone, which probably most folks are very familiar with Centerstone, and spent over a decade at Mental Health Cooperative working as a crisis responder. And then after that, I shifted into an administrative role serving as the state mental health crisis director at the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. So I guess you could say that I have probably touched every part of this system in some way. And so understanding the challenges of navigating our system and getting help and understanding the barriers that people and their families face, and also on the other side, the challenges and the barriers that providers and professionals face in trying to get help for the people that they serve. I guess you could say this is my life's work. Right out of college, I stepped into this work, and I continue to contribute our own efforts here through the Center of Hope for Behavioral Health.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It is awesome that you could spend some time with us. All right, so today's topic is culturally sensitive mental health crisis response. And the first thing that I want to say, there's a lot of words there that I think people know the meaning of individually, but you put them all together, and I think that's where some confusion starts to come in. Can you explain culturally sensitive mental health crisis response to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think most folks are familiar with the term cultural competency, right? I think we're hearing a lot more of that term nowadays, which is great. So I want to read to you kind of the corporate definition of cultural competency. So the American Psychological Association defines cultural competency as the possession of the skills and knowledge that are appropriate for and specific to a given culture, and the capacity to function effectively in cultural settings other than one's own. I think that we will begin to hear more of the term culturally sensitive versus cultural competency, very similar in meaning, but I challenge people to maybe set aside that corporate definition and think in terms of being human. Right. So we think about our beliefs, our values, our norms, right? This is how we perceive the world, and how we perceive the world is pretty much how we navigate life. If you think about it, my perception of healthcare, right, is gonna dictate, if not determine, how I navigate healthcare. You know, when you think of just the disparities historically, right? That's my beliefs, just generationally, what we think about, when people think of generationally what their parents and grandparents and great grandparents may have struggled with, or the challenges that they may have faced, and some of those things help shape, right, their beliefs and their values and their norms. And then that's how we in turn navigate life, and we approach certain situations and how we deal with those situations. So I think, cultural competency is one of the core values of psychology, right? So of course we need that, and that's there. But I think if we think in terms of more cultural, being culturally sensitive, it will humanize it, I believe, and I think it will. It won't be as challenging for folks to implement, right? Because it doesn't take a lot of thought when you think about it. It doesn't take a lot of thought to be compassionate, to be considerate, to be knowledgeable. Those are when you think of the tenets of cultural competency, right? So you think of having the knowledge, So making sure that you're informed of different cultures. Well, realistically, that's not always possible, right? I think that there's formal training out there that you can do to be knowledgeable of different cultures, but that's not always possible. But I think the willingness, right, to educate yourself on different cultures is there. I think when you think about consideration, understanding, respect, being flexible with your skills, all of these things are those tenets of cultural competency. If you think about those things in a culturally sensitive way, right? Consideration, that's kindness, right? Just being considerate of someone's beliefs, of someone's values. It does not discount your own. What that says is, I respect, I understand, I hear you, and I'm willing to help you in the best way that is for you and not for me, right?
Now, some of the pushback to cultural competency, cultural sensitivity, some of the pushback is that it's just designed to make another group feel bad. And you said use real talk. So unfortunately, some people believe that it's just to punish white people. That's sort of what we hear a lot. Now, I know that's not the case. You and I talked before the show, and I've been through cultural sensitivity and cultural competency training, and it's really amazing. And that's not what it's about at all. But of course, if you never take the class, if you never read the articles, if you never watch even something like this, it's easy to hear, oh, this is just not another, but it is a method of telling one group that they're wrong, or unfortunately, that is the pushback. I just want to throw it on the table and let you address it, because unfortunately, people do see that as the pushback, or people do see that as a problem, and that's so misguided.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I do agree with you there, and I think that is why we should think about why I challenge people to maybe. Yes, we have our corporate definition of cultural competency, but I think that is where that perception comes from, what you just described. If you think more in terms of being culturally sensitive, right, that brings the human into the picture. That brings kindness, that brings consideration, that brings understanding someone's values and norms and their beliefs. And when you have that perception, when you approach it in that way, you're approaching it as from a human perspective, right? And you're approaching that you're engaging with a human. So it's not necessarily when you think cultural competence, oh, this is how we teach white people to engage with, other cultures, what you just mentioned.
Right.
This is how we educate people to honor their own values, beliefs, and norms, while engaging and putting first the other person's values, beliefs, and norms as a human being.
So that everybody gets their needs met, right? I mean, that's it. Please, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's the goal of cultural sensitivity, so that everybody wins, that
Right.
everybody gets their needs met, everybody is understood, and everybody can move forward safely.
Absolutely, and that's why that's why it's important, I think, to point out and say, hey, you're still honoring your own values, beliefs, and norms. It does not discount that for the individual at all. What it says is, hey, I'm willing to honor my values, beliefs, and norms, but while I'm engaging with the person that's standing in front of me or the person that's sitting in front of me, um, I'm flexible in my skills that I can honor their values, beliefs, and norms and put them first within this particular situation, because my ultimate goal is to help them. Right. And
Wonderful.
so,
Thank you.
yeah.
So moving on to today's topic, putting the two things together, why is cultural sensitivity important in a crisis response?
Mm. I think about just my experience and my work as a crisis responder, and I think maybe when people think of crisis response or someone in a crisis, um, understanding that it's not always a calm situation that you're walking into, right? The word crisis itself kind of speaks to sometimes chaos, right? And so you're thinking about when you're walking into a situation where a crisis has occurred, you have a couple of goals, right? One is to de-escalate. You want to be able to de-escalate that situation so that the person that you're working with, or the family, the friends, whomever is around, so that everyone is able to communicate in a way that is going to move things forward. And when I say move things forward, I mean in a way that is going to get that person closer to the treatment that they need, right? And then, another ultimate goal is safety, right? You want to think about that everyone that is there within that crisis is safe, that the person that you're working with or that you're talking to, or if it's your loved one, whoever is engaging with that person, that everyone is safe, not just within the moment of crisis, but that they are there, that they are safe thereafter, the person you're working with and those other folks. Um, and also, I think that the ultimate goal is increasing trust, right? So really working with that person, that family, or if you're family and you're trying to help a loved one, increasing the trust within the situation, increasing the trust from that person into you, so that they trust that you're able to help them, is going to guide them and going to push them closer towards treatment, and closer towards safety, and closer, and being able to continue to de-escalate that situation, right? As trust goes up, de-escalation occurs. And I think lastly, probably an ultimate goal is compliance with treatment, right? So when there is a crisis, and help is available, or you're trying to figure out how to help that person, connection to help is going to be the ultimate goal. And so in order for you to get there, you've got to kind of work through all those other goals that I said, the safety, the trust, and all of those things. So when I think of cultural sensitivity in a crisis response, you go back to what I was saying earlier, right? A person's values, beliefs, and norms, being able to manage that situation in a culturally sensitive way, increases the chances of the situation being safe, the person being safe, increases trust, right? Because now I'm in crisis, and now I recognize that you see me, right? I recognize that you hear me, that you respect me, right? All of these things. And so the more awareness that comes along with that, even within families, or if it's a professional that's trying to help, one of the clients in crisis, um, the more that I know that you see me, that you hear me, that you respect me, the more I trust that you are genuinely trying to help me, and I'm more willing to listen, and hear you in terms of how you can help me be safe and get to treatment.
In crisis intervention, which we teach law enforcement, one of the things that we try to help the officers understand is that there is a disconnect in the way that law enforcement sees a situation and the way a person in a mental health crisis sees a situation. And this is a bad analogy, and I fully respect that it's a bad analogy, but is it analogous that you're saying that the way one culture sees a situation and the way another culture sees a situation could be vastly different, even though both cultures are seeing it correctly for them? So if the cultures don't understand, it could sort of become an accidental powder keg, not because you were malicious or poorly intentioned, but because you just didn't understand the dynamics as the person you were working with sees it. Is that, did
Absolutely.
I say something good there?
You said something that we need to put in a book. It needs to be in print. Absolutely, Gabe. Yes, and that, I think that is the importance of being culturally sensitive in crisis response and understanding what that looks like, right? So we say ask different questions and ask questions differently, right? So when we talked earlier about perception and how we view our perception of the world and our perception of our values, our norms, our beliefs, that's how we navigate life. And so when you have law enforcement that shows up and they have their own perceptions, beliefs, and norms, and how they navigate life with that, and just their job in itself can bring on certain perceptions, the work that they do every day. And then you have a person in crisis and a family that's there, and their values, beliefs, and norms, and their perception. There may be mistrust there with law enforcement showing up. And so all of those tenets that I mentioned before, you've got the opposite happening, right? You don't have de-escalation occurring, you have escalation, because you've got these two folks both trying to manage a situation based on their own values, beliefs, and norms, and perception of the world and perception of how things should go, right? And when I think of this, I think of several years ago, just as a crisis responder going out on a call, and with law enforcement present, and the scene was chaotic, and rightfully so, because everyone was very fearful of what was occurring, and there was a need for this individual to get treatment, to get treatment. And it wasn't necessarily a situation where they were willing to, right? And so as a crisis responder, it was time for me to go to work, right? Mentioning all those things I mentioned before. What are my ultimate goals? And I'm not just managing the situation with that particular individual, but you have family present, right? And so family is fearful as well. And when you think of culture, right, it's family. So it's not just the culture of the person that you're working with, but you're managing the culture of everybody that's present. And for this particular family, faith was very important to them. And so there was a need for the matriarch to pray over the situation. And so it just occurred that this particular situation, there was an officer that just did not understand the importance of that to the family, and not only the importance of that to the family, but how allowing this family to move forward in their faith was going to change the outcome of the situation, right? So it was important for this family to have their matriarch pray over the situation. Yes, it may have been taken 5 or 10 minutes to pray, but if the outcome was going to lead to those, what I mentioned before, an increase in trust, increase in compliance with treatment, increase in de-escalating the situation for everyone present,
right.
is it worth it to kind of just set your own values, beliefs, and norms aside and acknowledge that this is part of this family's culture, and allow them to pray? And so just having that sidebar conversation with that officer would help change the outcome of that situation. Being able to de-escalate and thankfully, very thankful to that officer for allowing the family to take that extra time to pray, which led to compliance. Because for that family, they now felt like they now felt like their loved one was covered. Right? They didn't want to let their loved one go without being covered.
And I think one of the things to point out in that whole story, going from a 30,000-foot view, is that they both had the same goal, which was to get their loved one help. The law enforcement officer wanted the person to get help and seek treatment. The family wanted, so the sticking point, for lack of a better word, was how to get there. And I think that has a lot of value. So often we think that the reason that these situations occur is because both sides have different goals. And I'm not everywhere, and I can only read but so often I read in the media and I think, what's so sad is that they both had the same destination. This whole thing derailed because they wanted to take different routes. And that's like ultimately sad because they were so close to common ground, but it sort of, it went cattywampus. We're going to go with cattywampus.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Cattywampus. I don't even know how you spell it.
I don't know how to spell it either. It's sort of like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. I can say it, but I could never text it. Yeah. So, let's build on that theme. One of the questions that comes up is, how can professionals respond to mental health crises in a culturally sensitive way? And I know that's like a real big question. So we'll have to give the Reader's Digest /TikTok /meme version of that answer. But I know you can handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that I just mentioned, right? Ask different questions, ask questions in a different way. I don't think that you would need to take a formal training before you meet with a person in crisis. I think that if you're working with that person and you're asking them questions as you normally would to gather your information and just kind of figure out what's going on, think about including those questions that address their culture. Again, this is beyond race, right? What their beliefs, their norms, their values. I think observing, being observant, right? So if you're working with someone within their home environment, are you seeing things within the home that speak to culture, right? You don't just look at those things and continue on in the way that you initially started. Ask questions. What is important to you? Ask the family. What is important to to the person that you're working with, your loved one? What is important to them? How can I use what is important to them to help them? Right. So in the example I gave earlier, if the question were asked, what is important to you? Or if the question were asked to the family, what is important to your loved one? And they mention faith, spirituality, right? Prayer. How can I use that to help you? Or to the family, how can I use that to help your loved one? Will you let us pray, right? Will you allow the matriarch of our family to pray over this situation, right? So I don't think that you, and it's impossible because, we professionals nobody knows all the things, right? But I think it's possible to learn about the person and their values and their beliefs and their norms as you go, right? As you walk through that encounter, you're showing that compassion, and you're showing that, hey, I hear you. Not only do I hear you, but I am receiving what you're saying, and I'm using it in a way that's going to best help you, not based on how I want to help you in my own way.
It sounds like being willing to listen, and I know that's exactly what you just said. I'm repeating it, but a willingness to listen is difficult for all of us, not just law enforcement or people in your position, orderly staff at hospitals, etc. Being willing to listen is difficult for all of us, and being willing to listen to things that we don't understand. And that we're having trouble comprehending is even harder. Can you address that for a moment? Because it's got to be very, very difficult to be willing to ask the questions. Let's just be honest, right? It's hard to ask people these questions, especially during a crisis, because it's chaotic, right? But being willing to listen is a secondary skill set. It's asking the question is number one, and being willing to genuinely listen is number two. Can you talk about that second part?
Yeah, and absolutely about listening. But I want to speak to asking questions, and asking questions in a different way. I don't think that it should be that hard, right? Because you're not asking questions from a textbook, right? You're simply asking questions from a place of compassion, from a place of trying to understand. So as if you were sitting with someone else, not in a crisis situation, you're trying to understand what is going on. I think that the difference in from a culturally sensitive perspective is you're asking those different questions, right? So I don't think that it should be hard. I think if it is difficult or challenging for someone to ask these types of questions, to get to know the person a little bit better, I think that that's where we take a step back and say, okay, maybe let's look at some maybe I do need some formal training. Maybe do I really truly understand from a culturally sensitive perspective how to move forward? Does that do you follow?
Yes.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense, and I like what you said there about it. It shouldn't be hard, right? You're right. It shouldn't be, but it is, right? Is it because people are stubborn? I mean, just do they just believe they know everything and they're doing what's best? And again, I want to be the first to admit that I am super guilty of this with the children in my life, the younger people in my life. I'm like, the millennial culture is foreign to me. They're everything they do is wrong. But that's just because I'm old. Is this what it's like, that people are just so stubborn and set in their ways that they're unwilling to acknowledge that they might be wrong, or that just because it works for me, it might not work for you? And how do we bridge that gap? I would love to just tell people to stop being stubborn, but I think you and I both live in the real world and know that won't work. What can we tell them to make them, it's easier, it's better, it gets you to your goals faster, it makes you not a jerk?
Yeah, no, I do think that that's part of the problem, and yes, it is a problem. It is a problem when you are stubborn, and when you feel like you cannot be wrong, and you are in a position of helping someone else, right? Especially helping someone else that is in a crisis situation. But I think also maybe look at the questions that you're asking, right? So I think that what may be difficult and hard for someone to ask, if they were asking, a question specifically about race, right? But this is that's not what I'm saying, right? So we're talking about culturally sensitive, like we've set that corporate definition of cultural competency aside, right? So being culturally sensitive, just coming and showing up as a human. So if I hear that it's difficult for someone to say to ask the question, what's important to you? That's that's when we need to take a step back. Why is that question difficult for me to ask? Now, if someone I don't know, I can't even think of a question that would be difficult, but that's just me. But I know there are difficult questions out there for sure. And I'm thinking probably the ones just from experience and just talking with other people, those questions that are specific to race or specific to faith, religion, spirituality, questions like that. But again, from a culturally sensitive perspective, you're asking open-ended questions because we're removing assumptions. That's important. Right. How can you respond in a culturally sensitive way? Check all of your assumptions at the door.
It sounds like people really psych themselves out, right? They just asking, what can I do for you? Or how can I help? Or what do you need? We have tricked ourselves into believing that these are, like you said, this is just kindness. This is just human connection. But we've tricked ourselves into believing that it's more than it is. And then we become afraid of it. And then we don't want to ask, or then we get angry or mad, or we put politics on it or religion. And then the whole thing breaks down. It sounds like you're just reminding people that asking, what can I do for you? What do you need? How can I help? These started out as just very basic human interaction questions, and they've just been pelted with nonsense, and they're unrecognizable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's it. Maybe think about asking those different questions, and ask questions. A lot of times people will rush in. I think I saw a comment that was I can't see it anymore, but I think it was speaking to trying to let's see. Yeah. There's a comment here. Gabe, can you read that?
Yep. Where is it? People are often consumed with rushing to fix. Whoops, let me pop myself on. People are often consumed with rushing to a fix as if they are helping, but in some cases it is a hindrance.
Yes, absolutely. And so along when there's a rush to manage that situation, to de-escalate, to get that person to help, when there's a rush there, what happens with that is all of those things that we talked about before come right along with that. The assumptions come in. It's hard for you it's difficult to show up as a human with compassion and being able to ask those questions and ask questions in a different way, ask different questions and ask questions in a different way, because it takes time. It takes time to value and honor someone's beliefs and norms and what's important to them. And so there's a need there to slow down.
To rush.
Yeah.
Everybody's rushing. In actuality, we need to slow down and really stop and think. And it sounds like we need to stop sort of buying into some of the internet arguments that certain things really have more power or hidden meanings, when in actuality, much of this stuff, like you said, is just human connection. It's just being present for somebody, providing them with what you need, with what they need, so that you can get to the goal that you want, which oftentimes coincides with the goal that they want as well, if they weren't in crisis. So I really appreciate you breaking it down like that. Moving along a little bit, we talked a lot about law enforcement. I think people have law enforcement on their brains, but of course, all of this also matters in inpatient hospitals, in emergency rooms, in clubhouses, in even case management, and just crises happen in all kinds of places with all kinds of people that aren't law enforcement. And treatment outcomes are much more important to providers, doctors, therapists, case managers, et cetera. How can culturally sensitive crisis response impact treatment outcomes?
Yeah, and I think most of what the conversation is today really speaks to those that are in a professional position working with people in crisis or with mental health issues. But I think that all of it can also be used by family and understood by family, and help to inform family in how to have the conversation with the provider or with the professional that is working with your loved one. If you're not getting these questions that I'm referring to, you volunteer the information. Hey, here's what's important to my loved one. Or if you're in crisis yourself, here's what's important to me. I would appreciate if you would listen and receive and implement that. Here's how you can best help me. Right. But when you think of treatment outcomes, like you mentioned, Gabe, you mostly think about, professionals or providers that are working with people. Treatment outcomes, it can be challenging, right, to define and to really define what that looks like when you're talking about culturally sensitive crisis response, and to like have data that specifically speaks to that. But I think overall, what treatment outcomes look like is what I mentioned before, right? Safety, all of those things lead to the person being connected to help, which is the ultimate goal. That the treatment outcomes, once that person is connected to help, right? That what has occurred during that crisis situation, that whole process, being connected to help, actually receiving the help, right? Compliance with treatment, it just, like, the journey continues, right? Treatment, we've got compliance with treatment, we've got improved mental status, we've got de-escalation has occurred, we've got education to that person and their families, of now we know what we need to do in order to make sure that help is available, and that my loved one is helped. And so this is how we can impact treatment outcomes in a positive way, right? By showing up, by asking those questions, by honoring values, beliefs, and norms. But there also can be a negative impact on treatment outcomes when we show up and we're not being culturally sensitive, right? So think about those values, beliefs, and norms that may be ignored, right? Or things are occurring that are the complete opposite of that. Use that same example. Faith was important. Prayer was important to that family. So if the family, if the matriarch was not allowed to pray, you actually have not only impacted that individual's situation, the situation could escalate, but there's a negative impact on treatment outcomes for that individual, because now there's no trust, right? And so should a crisis occur again, automatically what already may have been that family's belief about who showed up, which was myself and law enforcement, it has now been confirmed, right? So here would be yet another situation or instance for this family where we were not heard, we were not cared about, all of those things. But it would impact treatment outcomes in a negative way for that person, but also for that family, right?
Right.
Because now, family, fearful, scared, all of those things, not really knowing what's going on. But what did they know for sure? What they knew for sure was if I prayed over my loved one, they would be okay. If I could, yeah.
Yeah, and to build on that, if they were not allowed or stopped, et cetera, then they would know for sure that they are not understood by the people who are there to help them. And what you said a couple of minutes before was you're going to have to come to them and get information and ask them for their help. And if they have it in their brain, why you don't listen to me, you don't care, you're not going to listen. They're gonna they're gonna dial it in, right? They're gonna be like, oh yeah, Bob is fine. Yeah, sometimes Bob is weird, because they're going to figure, hey, they're not listening to me anyways. Why am I going to put effort into this?
Yeah.
And then that is going to lower outcomes as well. You know, one of the things that I think of when I think of outcomes, my mother, and she always loves it when I say this. My mother has been on a diet since I was, I don't know, 3 years old, and I'm not 3 years old anymore. But she's been on Weight Watchers. She is a huge fan of Weight Watchers, which she always reminds me is now called WW. I swear they're not a sponsor. But one of the things that's super important to that particular weight loss plan are a couple of concepts. One of them is no forbidden foods, because the minute that you make a food forbidden, that's the only food that you want. And they know that this impacts outcomes. But more importantly, if you go to any of the meetings, and I too have had my struggles with weight, and I've gone to meetings, they always make sure that they know that you can have birthday cake. Right? It's your birthday. Get a cupcake, smack it in. They talk about ways to make the birthday cake healthier. They talk about ways to maybe have a smaller piece, but nowhere in any of their literature, in any of their rallies, you know, with the leader in the front, nowhere does it say, no, you're on a diet, you can't have cake, because they understand the importance to the American culture of celebrating your birthday and having birthday cake. And that's just so little. Right? That was just such an easy thing for them to figure out and do. And the more I listen to you talk, I think there's just so many little things here. There's so many little things that we can do to help people that get us to where we want to go. You know, Weight Watchers wants you to lose weight because that way you'll keep coming back and you'll refer them to a friend. You want to lose weight because that's why you joined in the first place. Applying that over to cultural competency, we just need to find those birthday cake moments. They're not big lifts, but if you don't understand the importance of birthday cake to the American culture, you're probably going to just be like, who needs cake? Cake is stupid. I imagine there's many cultures that don't understand why we light baked goods on fire once a year because we got older, but it's super important to us.
Yeah.
And it matters so much. I want to stay along the family line. How can families help their loved ones in crisis? And I want to put like a little tack onto that question. How can they advocate for cultural sensitivity? Because as we've discussed, it is often met with, oh, that's not important. And while it may not be important to the person who said, oh, I don't care about cake, it's of vital importance to the person who asked. How can they move the needle on that so that they're advocating, but not what so often happens, instigating, fights or anger, etc. I know you have lots to share on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's advocating and navigating this system, Gabe, it's challenging. It's challenging, and it can be exhausting, and it can be disheartening at times. I think that is why it is so important for myself and for many others out there in the field to educate people and families on how they can advocate for the best help for themselves and for their loved ones. When someone is in crisis, you don't necessarily have time or as many options that you would have available, as many options available to you that you would have if you were not in crisis, right? If when you're in crisis, there's kind of this time is of the essence, right? So when you're not in crisis, you may be able to advocate and find a provider or professional to help you that shares your same values, beliefs, norms, and understanding. But when you're in crisis, you don't always have that option. And so I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. A lot of what we've talked about is applicable to professionals and providers, but I think families can use this information as well. If you're not asked those questions, share that information regardless of who shows up, right? Share that information. Something that I always share with families who may have someone with an illness, and so unfortunately, crisis may not just be a one-time thing. Identify that person in your family that person is that your loved one is most connected to, right? And so this is gonna kind of be the go-to person when you notice that there's an impending crisis. Allow that person, talk with that person, call that person over, and depending on your culture, this could be the grandmother, this could be the uncle, this could be a family friend that is also a cousin, family friend is also a sister, and that person kind of take the role of being educated in, hey, here's what we need to know, when here's what we need to be armed with when we have to make a phone call to help our loved one. It's not necessarily necessary for everyone in the family to have this information, but if you can have that one person that loved one trusts, right? That one person that whenever they show up at the house, that loved one listens. They're able to calm down, to de-escalate. They're able to speak their language in whatever way that they have, the language that they have between them, and help calm the situation. And that person make that phone call, talk about, hey, here's what is going on. Here's what we need. Here's what we know we need, right? If it's your first time, you may not know this. But if your loved one has been in crisis before, and there was a positive outcome, continue to use that information. Here's what's going on. Here's what we know we need, right? Here's what's important to us. Here's what we know. And here's how you can use that information to help my loved one. And that's regardless of who shows up, right?
And I really like the advice of send in a spokesperson, figure out who the most level-headed, calm, reasonable, arm that person, and everybody just sort of stand behind. I think about my own family. Never send in my father. His solution to all problems is yelling at it. Never send in my mother because she'll just agree to anything. She's the stereotypical people pleaser. But I think about myself or my sister. We've got the right. We're pushy without being aggressive, right? We understand, we use the right language, we hold firm, but that's, my family has figured this out as well. Whenever there's a problem, it's Gabe and Debbie, Debbie's my little sister. We get to handle it first. Then if that doesn't work, we unleash my father. We call that the nuclear option in the Howard family. But sincerely, I think that more families need to accept this. And I have a saying, I say that the youngest child has saved more people with mental illness than any other family member, just because of their stereotypical role in the family. They're the youngest, they're usually the baby of the family. The parents have made all the mistakes on the older kids, so they're less traumatized. they grew up with more people around them who oohed and awed over them. But sincerely, that's figuring that out, I think, is incredible advice, because it can be overwhelming to have a room full of people telling you, asking you, requesting, yelling, whatever. So I think that's really, really good advice. We're almost out of time, but I just want to touch briefly. We've talked a lot about how to have cultural competency and cultural sensitivity in crisis response, et cetera. But I just want to touch closely on, usually it's families that notice that a loved one is in crisis. So I don't want to skip over that. We've sort of started from they're already in crisis and moved forward. Let's take a step back and just talk about maybe some simple ways that families can help their loved ones who are in crisis. Obviously, the cultural sensitivity probably doesn't apply because they're all members of the same family. But I think it's important what people do before help arrives is sometimes just as important as what help does when they arrive, et cetera. So I just wanted to touch on it before we head off into the sunset. This is really important, because ultimately the family may end up diverting a need for external help in the situation. But I think once it has been identified that you have a loved one with an illness, and that there may be a time where crises occur either occasionally or frequently,
I think it's very important, one, to be educated, right? Be educated about what that illness is, what those symptoms look like, how to recognize an impending crisis, is there, significant change in behavior. And then I think families should develop a plan, right? And so what that plan can look like is identifying who that support is going to be, who that kind of spokesperson is going to be. Write this down. Have at the family meeting. Talk about it at the family meeting. Identify that person. Everyone may have that person's phone number stored in their phone. Understand, hey, here's when we may call you, because when everything is going well, you know what that looks like, right? And so if when things are not going so well, you're going to know what that looks like. After that first time, after that first crisis, use that to help inform yourselves as the family of, okay, here's what we know worked, right? And so let's think about adding that to our plan. We've identified someone. Now, do we all know as a family when we should call that person, when we should call that support? That ultimately can prevent having to call someone to come into the home or having to take that person to get help. Because you think about, absolutely, NAMI channel, family to family, to families and caregivers, invaluable, absolutely.
The more you know, right? The more you know.
Yes, they play. I think that family plays a role in those treatment outcomes that we talked about earlier, right? That's part of that cultural sensitivity, understanding if family is part of their culture. Hey, what's important to you? You hear the word family. Okay, well, you've got 15 people that have showed up as part of their plan. Their plan may have been, we know that it helps our loved one if we're all there supporting them in the moment of crisis. So when you show up, or when family calls for help, that's what you can communicate. Hey, our family is here, and we know that this helps our loved one get connected to help. Hey, we know they will willingly go to treatment, and they understand what that looks like if we're all there with them. So you may not want to say, oh, well, nobody can come, nobody can, only one person can bring them, or you follow where I'm going.
I do.
Yeah. I think within all of that, the most important piece is think about developing a crisis plan as a family.
I know I sound like a broken record when I say this, but of course, as a family, we develop all kinds of plans. Right, fire drills are the most common. We've all discussed. Okay, we're going to go meet on the line, even if it's had like a lame fire plan. Mine was like get out of the house, meet in the front lawn. But it was still discussed, right? It was not as robust as it needed to be looking back, but it was still mentioned. We discussed all kinds of things. If somebody comes to pick you up and it's not your father and I, don't get in the car, right? Stranger danger was a thing that we discussed. There was all kinds of things that never happened and were unlikely to happen. House fires are not that common, but we still discussed them. What to do if you come home and nobody's home? Go to the neighbor. It just means your father and I are running late. That kind of thing. All previously discussed. But when it comes to a mental health crisis, sometimes even when we've been through many of them, we still just want to believe so desperately that that's over and it's never going to happen again, that we don't want to discuss it. And unfortunately, this leaves us unprepared in the event that it does happen again. And I always remind families, look, you discuss what happened if your house catches on fire, and that's unlikely to happen. So why not discuss what happens if there's another mental illness crisis, even though it's unlikely to happen? Just steer into that. Hey, it's unlikely to happen, but that way, if it does, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Very important. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's very important.
You are absolutely awesome. Thank you. The hour just flies by, doesn't it?
It did. I feel like it's been 15 minutes.
I know. One minute you're like, all right, are you ready to start? And the next minute you're like, all right, well, we're on our way out of here. Everybody is super, super glad you were here. This was amazing. Thank you for sharing your experiences, Morenike. Sincerely, there's so many people. I can't even post them all up here, but people absolutely loved you being here. I loved you being here. NAMI Tennessee loves you being here. Thank you so much. Before we get out of here, I'm going to remind everybody, if you don't want to miss events like this, you just need to sign up for NAMI Tennessee's email list. Just go to namitn.org. It warns you of events like this. It tells you about the gala, the NAMI Walks program, legislative advocacy across the state that you can participate in. Of course, it's absolutely free. Doesn't cost you a dime. We just steal your email address and harvest it. No, I'm just kidding. The privacy policy is clear. We only send you stuff from NAMI Tennessee, and sincerely, it's a great thing to have to keep in touch with everything that goes on in the state of Tennessee as it relates to mental health. All right, well, thank you for being here. We're gonna wave goodbye, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.